Welcome to Goals and Game Changers, where we speak with experts on strategy, leadership, agility, and business transformation. My name is Stacey Louie, and I am the CEO of Hyperdrive. I'm excited to speak with you today with Tom Perry. Tom is our Vice President here at Hyperdrive, and he works with many of our clients at the C-suite level. So he's speaking with the CEO, possibly the Chief Technology Officer or the Chief Digital Officer. He might even be working with a CFO or COO. And as he speaks with these executives on change, he found an interesting nuance. In fact, the topic of today is agile isn't always the answer. So many of our coaches come to me and they ask, gosh, Stacey, what makes Hyperdrive so different? Why are you so special compared to other types of companies in your space? And what I would share is we have the nuances, being able to understand that sometimes agile isn't always the answer. And sometimes when we speak with executives, we speak in a different language and we speak with a different purpose. So today you're going to learn a few things about why we think that agile isn't always the answer and how we help nuance that into making very actionable plans and getting clear on strategy with executives. So let's jump in. Tom Perry, Vice President at Hyperdrive, here to talk with us about agile, but more specifically, agile may not always be the answer. So Tom, can we just hop right into this? Because it's such an interesting question.
Sure, we can do that. My approach to Agile has changed a great deal over time. So I've been doing Agile now for, my first project was in 1998. So I've got a few years under my belt, and the way I approach it these days is a lot different than when I was much younger. Originally, I would oftentimes go into engagements. And when I was coaching folks, it was very much sort of, we want agile, we want Scrum, for example, and it was my job to show them how to do that. And the interesting thing was that there were times when it was really clear that the organization or the leadership of the organization making that request had no idea what they were asking for. In fact, they were using the agile words. They were talking about agility. But when you went and you talked to the teams, it was quite clear that the way they were working with the teams were very much in their old ways of working or with sets of expectations that really didn't fit well with agile at all. And that actually was fairly common to run into situations like that. And so I think for me, there was a lot of learning at that point, which is, what do we do here? If we're being told we want to adopt an agile way of working, but when you actually get into the culture, when you actually start working with the leadership, when you start working with the people, it becomes quite clear that they have a completely different set of expectations, that their culture may not be set up for that at all. And they, in fact, may not really realize kind of what they're asking for. And so it's at that point that you have kind of a golden moment to work with the team. And the team's expectations are, hey, we're doing Scrum, we're doing the agile thing, we love this stuff. And then they bump into the wall of culture in the organization. They start running into obstacles, and it becomes harder and harder, and they start getting discouraged. And that's where you end up saying, oh, hold on a second. Maybe we should talk to your management. Maybe we should talk to the boss, because the boss obviously likes it this way, likes the way we've got things set up in the organization, and doesn't realize that they've basically set you up on a crash course to really run into serious conflict with the rest of the culture.
Right. There's that polarity.
Yeah.
Polarity of what's desired versus what you currently have or
Absolutely.
what you're able to do. It's sort of like the situation if you were to start a restaurant. I can imagine a boss might come in and say, gosh, I want the world's best French food. And you go back into the walk-in and you see piles of cheddar cheese and maybe some refried beans and some ground beef and taco shells. And you're thinking, gosh, my boss is saying we need to do this French food, but all I have are Mexican food ingredients. Like, how does this actually come together?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm. I love that metaphor too. I like the food approach. I had a different one that I used to use, and this was based on some experiences where I ended up going to the leadership team and saying, "Do you guys tell me what agile looks like to you?" And I would start to get this very different perception from them. And it reminded me of this sketch, a Monty Python sketch, called the Lion Tamer sketch. And I loved it. It was hilarious. And in the Lion Tamer sketch, if you haven't seen it, um, there's a career counselor sitting at his desk, and in comes an accountant. And the accountant sits down in front of the career counselor and says, "I want to be a lion tamer." And of course, he's an accountant. He's this very small, diminutive little character. And the career counselor looks at him and says, "A lion tamer, really? Do you know what a lion tamer does?" And the accountant says, "Well, yes, yes. He uses a whip, and he holds up a stool, and he just makes those lions do what he wants. I can't wait to be a lion tamer." And the counselor sits back and gets a little concerned and says, "So tell me what these lions look like." And the accountant pauses for a minute and says, "Well, they've got stumpy little legs, a long nose, and they eat ants." And and at that point, the counselor sits back and says, "Oh no, no, what a lion looks like is this," and I think in some ways that's exactly what's happening with these companies. They've decided they want to be a lion tamer, but they don't really know what a lion tamer is. And when you go and you talk to the leadership and say, "What's agile look like?" They say, "Well, it's got short, stumpy little legs, long nose, eats ants."
Mm.
And so it's at that point that and look, that's just fine if that's the answer. If agile looks very different, then I'm like, okay, now I know what you're after, or now you know what I'm trying to do. One of us has to change our game, right? Either the organization has to start looking at, "Oh, agile's a lot more than we thought," or they can ask me, "Tom, how can we cater this to better suit our organization?" Either answer is perfectly appropriate, but it's an important inflection point where we have to get aligned on this, because otherwise you have this mismatched set of expectations at the top of the organization where they're looking for anteaters, and people at the bottom of the organization are expecting lion tamers, and it's just not working out at all.
Yeah, yeah. You definitely have a situation where you have the differences of expectations. I mean, imagine, I would imagine executives come in and they're looking at their Harvard Business Review, or they're hearing from the peers that you've got to
Mhm.
be agile, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't you agile? They read the short little description or the short article. Maybe they don't read the whole article, certainly.
Hmm.
And they come in with their Harvard Business Review in hand, and they say to their executive leadership team, they say, "Hey, gosh, we need to make these changes, folks. We need to become agile."
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, they're prescribing the how. They don't really they haven't had that chance to take a step back and think about, well, why is it that you want to be agile? What problem are you really trying to fix, right? Because really agile is a set of practices and processes and an approach to doing work. It's really a new way of working
Yeah.
and a new operating model. So when executives come in, they're not necessarily saying, "Hey, change my entire operating model." But at
Right.
the same time, when they ask for agile, they really are.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's led to some outcomes that you wouldn't expect. On the one hand, I've had some engagements where it's led to, "Oh, that's not what we thought it was. We need to hold off. We need to think this through." And, from my perspective, that was great. Although, unfortunately, it led to the end of the engagement because they're like, "Yeah, let's slow down on this whole agile thing. We need to really think through what this is going to mean for us." And that's actually a great outcome. I would rather them stop and think about it rather than trying to barrel ahead and roll out agile across an organization. that's really not designed for it or set up for it. Uh, and um, and so that's one outcome. And I think honestly, that's where a lot of us should be very happy. I mean, that's a good way for these things to end up. Another way is for them to say, "Oh, well, help us paint the picture of
Mhm.
what that might look like for us. Help us understand how we're going to do this. We need to rethink some things. We need to look at how we're structured and organized because, like you say, it's a different operating model, and we're ready to go there. And I've been lucky enough to work with a few of those folks as well, and that's very exciting and very challenging.
So let me ask you this, Tom. Do you think it's um, in challenge the challenge of adopting new processes, or is it maybe something deeper? Maybe it's something along the lines of actually making a change, recognizing that there's an opportunity for change, and then investing in the change. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I think most of the time, well, I think there are a lot of different circumstances, but to answer are we ready to invest in change? Is now, are we trying to invest in change rather than invest in agility necessarily? I prefer that, and I see that an awful lot of the time where I think the question isn't really, is this agile or not? But we're looking for a way to change. Everybody's always looking for performance improvement. They're looking for, teams that function better. They're looking for organizations that are more efficient. And the specific motivations will change from case to case, but the underlying goals, the underlying things that are driving them, I do think are the same. And so, but they're not agilely things. They are things that can, and they're not problems that are unique that agile is the only solution for. And of course, I say that a little bit tongue in cheek because even when I use the term agile, I'm talking about a huge umbrella of different methodologies. But even beyond that, I guess as I've gotten to be an older and crankier coach, I'm more and more less interested in the specifics of the methodology and more interested in how it's going to express itself in terms of the people involved. So I'm working with some teams right now where I've probably had the most laid back introduction of Agile ever because and I think some people might be disoriented by it because when I introduced a daily stand up, I didn't even do any of the associated things. Nobody asked the three questions. I wasn't hassling people about time limits. I wasn't worried about whether you did it 5 days a week or 3 days a week. I just walked in the door and said, "Hey, can we meet to sync up once a day?" Full stop. That's it. And that was backing away from the specifics of Scrum or any particular agile methodology and more interested in what's the problem? What's the problem I'm trying to solve? And in this case, I want people just to stay in sync. And and generally speaking, I'm only going to put or introduce the level of change that's responsible for this particular group. And in this case, these folks got together and had delightful daily stand-ups just fine. They didn't need me much beyond that. They were having their conversations, they were well-directed conversations. You didn't hear the three magic questions. You didn't hear anybody saying, "Oh, this is taking too long, we have to stop." They just did it. And they did it fairly intuitively. And so that allowed me to focus then on areas that were perhaps more important to them rather than the daily stand-up itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, Tom. I'm thinking about what you said, and what I'm actually hearing you say, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, is
Mm.
maybe from an agilist perspective, we shouldn't even be thinking about agile at all. Like, as far as maybe not being overly prescriptive about the precise processes and procedures that are embedded within a framework, but
Mhm.
rather the principles that drive the value.
Yeah, I'm much more, I think there is a world of creative alternatives out there. And I'm much more interested in playing with those alternatives and finding something that's best suited for the folks involved and less interested in adhering to or complying to whatever Scrum says I should do or Kanban says I should do. And I find that that approach feels much more gratifying to me and much more natural. So I'm being very minimalist as I'm engaging and sort of waiting to see organically what the groups are going to come up with, rather than trying to stuff them into a box and then see if they can climb out.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. From an executive perspective, though, like imagine you're an executive and you're investing all this money into a transformation or making changes or training, whatever the case might be. What do you find that their perspective is when they see something like this? Like what kind of impressions do they have as a business leader investing in their organization?
I think if we're not well aligned on the goals and what we're trying to achieve with the changes that we're introducing, they can get very concerned very quickly because they're not quite sure where you're going. And I think the on the other hand, there's certainly a pressure, I think, when you're working across larger organizations, when you're acting as an executive where you're really accountable for all of the teams or all of the different initiatives that are going on. Your accountability is very different than a coach's accountability with a single team or a group of teams. You're much more interested in seeing things uniformly applied across a large group. And it can start to concern you if you have a coach in one group who's doing things differently than what's going on in another group. And so then you're asking yourself, well, what am I getting? I thought I purchased Agile, and instead I'm getting this specific thing over here and this specific thing over there. And I think that's cause for concern in certain
Mm,
situations.
mhm.
Um, if your goal is to have really standardized practices, like, and that reminds me kind of like a safe rollout, for example. When you're rolling out safe, the expectation is everybody's getting the same training, everybody's going to behave very similarly. We're going to do everything the same way across a broad number of teams. And I've been involved in some very big rollouts where it's, literally hundreds of teams. And and that's hard to get away from. There's significant pressure in that situation for everyone to do everything the same. At the same time, you have to ask yourself, where is the freedom for my team to figure out what works best for us?
Mhm.
Or my group, or whatever that may be, because it turns out that sometimes you have a finance team that behaves very differently than a software team or a development team, and so using the exact same process for those two people, without regard for looking at their context, can lead to one team feeling very much like they are not being well served.
hmm hmm Yeah, very good. I just thinking about the context of teams adopting a different approaches here, whether it be agile or some other way, they're trying to make this change. What do you see as being the most impactful to help improve teams and team performance when they're faced with this question of agile and maybe this transformation being pressured on them to do agile the exact way that the books and the framework say.
It's a good question. I'm tempted to say that really, a high degree of trust, building a high degree of trust with the teams, really plays a key role, because I have been in the position of being somebody who's had to sort of apply or enforce or get this compliance or train it one way or another, and it's not been as effective as when I have focused really on building a close, trusting relationship with the team where they feel like I am an advocate for them.
Yes.
And if they believe that, then they're going to be much more willing to work closely and adopt change and things like that, as opposed to if they believe that I'm there to tell them how to do it, then I start to look like just some consultant management is hired in. They're going to sit through and just go through the training and then go back to whatever they were doing. So
Exactly.
there's an element of building trust really quickly, which I think is really essential.
Very much a bespoke approach where not if you're not everything's seen as you're the hammer and everything's a nail, right?
Right, right, right.
Yeah, yeah, very
Exactly.
much more thoughtful and mindful as you go into these engagements.
Yeah.
Um, so to summarize, Tom, kind of your perspective on agility and what happens in these situations. Can you give us just a quick summary on that?
Oof. I think uh, the thing that comes to mind, if I were to summarize it all, is really to um, putting my lion tamer metaphor aside. It's really a matter of empathizing not only with the teams but with the leadership, understanding what they're trying to get at, uncovering any discrepancies they may have between what they're saying and what they're really organized around, or what their operating model, and helping them to reconcile that difference. And so that's a very high-minded way of putting it, but I think at its essence, I have to relate to them very quickly. I have to relate to the team very quickly, and then find the mismatches,
Mhm.
and help them reconcile those.
And at the same time, pulling in the perspective of leadership and what are they willing to make, what do they really want, and what kind of change, and what are they willing to pay for that in terms of shift on culture, um, operations, all the other components of really change, and are they willing to embrace that change?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's it's a tough needle to thread, and but I think that's why some of the best consultants I know, some of the best advisors I know, are people who build trust very, very quickly.
Yeah. Okay, well, before we let you go, what one inspiration of advice can you offer to people who are facing the same situation where, hey, they're working in an environment, not quite sure if Agile is going to be an immediate fit or what's going to happen. Like, what's the sage advice that you would give?
Well, I would actually share what I learned from a good friend of mine, Tom Loy. And Tom Loy was a master at really building good relationships with people. And he was the kind of person, he's that marvelous person who could sit in an elevator and come up with any conversation like that with a complete stranger. And he always managed to identify something that he really loved about the person. And that approach was absolutely miraculous when I was working with him, and I found it kind of rubbing off this ability to just look at anybody and come out of the interaction with, you know what I love about you? I love this, and so that meant people responded very well to that. Tom was able to relate very closely with them, build trust very quickly with them. So it's that ability to find just something that you really love about the folks that you're working with. And that would probably describe some of the engagements I'm working on right now. When I hear myself talk about them, I talk about them because, God, I think I really like these people.
As we were talking, Tom, I was thinking about performance and results.
Yes.
So if you're executive, you're like, well, shoot, these guys gonna do whatever they want. It's gonna be a free for all. Um, how do we keep focused on performance? Because Agile's about performance, right?
I think there are two things that we can weave in there.
Yeah.
Number one, the goals of the engagement often vary, and I've worked with models that said, look, if you're an engagement that if you're an organization that's focused on performance, if that's your goal, then we're going to focus on goal setting. We're going to focus on portfolio management. We're going to focus on execution, right? On the other hand, some organizations want to focus more on collaboration, on teamwork, things like that. So it's not always performance. And so if you want to focus on collaboration, if you're an organization that's maybe a church group or an educational institution, then you're going to have a different set of priorities that won't necessarily be performance oriented, but are important to you. And so then if it's collaboration, I'm going to focus on facilitation. I'm going to focus on team behaviors, those sorts of things. And so I would cater it to the goals of the organization. And I think that's one of the purposes that Discovery serves for us, is to really kind of roll back the sheets and uncover what the motivations of the organization are, so that then we can design a solution that meets those needs. That said, I think the other thing that I've seen in large organizations with multiple coaches is, man, they get out of sync in a hurry. You get one coach that likes to use story points, and another coach that likes to use gummy bears, and another coach that doesn't like to do sizing at all. And that can lead to a lot of chaos, honestly. And so having someone who is responsible for owning the transformation and aligning the coaches. So that was one of the things that I had to do on the bigger organizations. If I had coaches that were working with me, I had to have sort of a come to Jesus meeting with the coaches and say, okay, this is how we're going to do sizing. This is how we're going to do planning. This is how we're going to do retrospectives, and really have the sort of meeting where I say, that's what we're going to do, boys and girls, and I don't care if you don't like it or not, and you had to have that wrestling match, that sort of work it out, so that you're all basically providing the same guidance, speaking with as much as possible one voice. And that's a very serious consideration when you've got any kind of transformation that involves multiple coaches in the engagement. It's almost inevitable. They're all going to have different biases, different approaches to the way they do things. And if you don't get them synchronized, then you're likely to set up a situation where the leadership is going to see inconsistencies all over the place, and they will call you on it.
Tom, we see a lot of organizations and a lot of people trying to make these changes related to agility. Based off of the things that you're working on and the things that you're seeing, what would be the player of the week? Because here at Goals and Game Changers, we have players of the week. What's the player of the week that you'd call out?
It's Angie Huang, and she's been partnering with me on a recent engagement, and she's been fantastic. She has, well, I'm always anxious when I'm introducing ideas and change, that I am, well, you never know how well it's going to be received. You stand in front of the executives and you say these things, and you get, that face. And she has been someone who has been a cheerleader for ideas that I think the organization is ready for, and has been absolutely fundamental to the success of getting that organization to start thinking differently about how they work and how they structure themselves, and has come back to me and been very encouraging. Keep it up, more of the same, more of the same, that sort of thing. And I love the fact that she turns right around and then demonstrates it, exemplifies it, shows people exactly what she means. So she acts as a model for the organization. And so that is kind of a superpower.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Tom, for joining us on Goals and Game Changers. We appreciate your thoughts into understanding Agile and how maybe it's not the exact answer for everybody, at least not right away. And for us to like take a step back and peel the onion a little and get down to a more meaningful root cause. So thanks so much, Tom, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. That was Tom Perry, Vice President at Hyperdrive. We're glad to share this and other resources that we have available, so please follow us on social media to catch the latest and greatest. And if you want to take a look at some of our resources in our resource library, there's one available. You can find that at hyperdriveagile.com. Be glad to share that too. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks on Goals and Game Changers. Take care.